Hello, I'm Oliver Colling, and this is my 70s TV childhood. Hello, and welcome back to my 70s TV childhood. We are a podcast which celebrates what it was like to grow up in 1970s Britain as a child, and the important role that television played in our and our families' lives back then. If you're new to the podcast, then a very warm welcome to you. And if you're a regular listener, then welcome back. We are now well into our 7th season and have released over 200 episodes, something which seems absolutely unbelievable, as it only seems like yesterday since we started our regular trips back to the 1970s. Now, I know some of you like to hear our stats, so at the last count, we've had listeners from 165 countries or sovereign territories, which is truly remarkable. And our listeners have been listening from over 6,700 towns and cities worldwide. So how did we get here? Well, largely it's been through the loyalty and support of our listeners. I am absolutely moved by how many of you engage with us as well as listen. And I am eternally grateful for all your comments and suggestions for the podcast. Somebody asked me the other day if we struggle to find ideas for what to feature on the podcast, and I gave them the honest answer that I think our potential list of topics is virtually endless. Not least because our listeners are always sending in ideas for what you'd like to see featured. So I hope that means that you'll be able to listen to us for a long time to come. Now, for those of you who enjoy our quiz, I'm going to give another quick plug to our new game, which will be coming out soon. The finest minds in podcast land have been engaged on a quest to bring you a version of our theme tune quiz that you'll be able to play at home and with your family and friends. We are about to start manufacturing, but as we get to that point, we'd really appreciate it if you could let us know whether this is something you'd be interested in buying. There is no commitment at this point, but so we can get production numbers right, we will be grateful if you could go to our blog at www.my70stvchildhood.com and just let us know whether you'd be interested in the game. I should also say that any purchase of a game will help towards the costs of producing the podcast, so that would be much appreciated. More to follow on this, and more updates on our launch schedule to come soon. If you've recently been in touch and I haven't responded to you, I do apologise. My day job sometimes gets in the way a bit, and I do know that I owe some of you a response. But anyway, thank you to all of you who've been in touch. We had a big response following our recent pre-football World Cup episode, which is looking back at the 1978 World Cup tournament held in Argentina. Many of you got in touch to say you'd had similar memories of the tournament, including being stunned by the huge stadiums and all the ticker tape, discovering Mario Kempes as the emerging star of the tournament, and having long and emotional arguments with your parents about whether you should be allowed to stay up and watch late night games on a school night. I have to admit, although this is not a scientific sample, most of you had a similar experience to me and were spectacularly unsuccessful in persuading your parents to let you stay up and watch the games the night before school. And with hindsight, I can understand why. And a special mention to regular listener and big supporter of the podcast, Russell, who told me that he and his brother had their own Subbuteo World Cup, where they staged every game on the dining room table in line with the tournament schedule. We are mightily impressed with that, Russell. If you'd like to share any of your memories, suggest subjects we might cover in future episodes, or just say hello, then you can do so in a number of ways. Leave a comment on our blog at www.my70stvchildhood.com or on our social media sites on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube and LinkedIn. Or you can just email oliver@my70stvchildhood.com. Now, I'm going to make a confession. I don't watch much television these days, which might sound like an odd thing for the host of a TV-themed podcast to say, but the reality is I don't seem to have as much time to watch TV as life gets in the way. And when I do sit down and watch, without having a specific programme in mind, I'm reminded of the Bruce Springsteen song line that says there's 57 channels and nothing on. I was reminded of this when I was staying in a hotel in Reading for work recently. I was quite late back into my room and switched on the TV and discovered, if that's the right word, The Real Housewives of Cheshire. Now, if any of you have watched that show, you can imagine I was quite surprised to find out what goes on around Wilmslow and Alderley Edge, which appears to be a bit of a different place from when I was going around the local pubs and clubs in the 1980s. I blame the footballers. But what seeing a few minutes of this show did do was remind me how prolific reality TV shows have become. Whether it's a serious medical show like 24 Hours in A&E, or the Made in Chelsea, or the Only Way is Essex. Probably my guilty secret in reality TV shows is that I do enjoy watching the odd episode of Police Interceptors, which is really quite gripping, as I can't believe how stupid so many of the criminals featured are, and how patient some of the police are with these bizarre situations that they find themselves in. But it hasn't always been like that. As a child, growing up in the 1970s, we had many documentaries which always seemed to be quite disciplined and showed their subjects in a good light, like the famous documentary featuring the royal family, which was all very interesting but hardly cutting edge in terms of reality. But all of that changed in 1974 when the BBC showed us one of the first major fly-on-the-wall documentary series, The Family, which showed us the life of the Wilkins family from Reading. Reading again. All roads seem to be leading to Reading for this week's episode.
The problem was to find a family prepared to tolerate the intrusion by a film crew into their every private moment. To find such a family, we chose Reading, population 132,000 and situated 40 miles west of London. Famous for seeds and biscuits, Reading has all the problems of any town. We carried out many interviews, and finally, one family emerged that we hope can meet the demands of this documentary serial, the Wilkins of Reading. As you can see, we're filming. It is going to be a tremendous intrusion into your privacy, because we will film everything, and there's no lights, so you're not going to be in a position where you think, well, once they turn the lights off, we can talk in secret. We can really discuss the things that are necessary to making this family work. We are here all the time, and we can film you at any time, anywhere.
We've all talked it over. We know that much would be involved. So therefore, in for a penny, in for a pound, we're either going to do it or we're not going to do it.
There aren't that many pounds in it.
No, I know. We're not interested in money in that respect. I mean, all right, fair enough, so we get paid. That is by the way.
Broadcast by the BBC in 1974, The Family followed the everyday lives of an ordinary working-class family from Reading, Berkshire. On the surface, that might not sound revolutionary. Television programmes had been showing ordinary people, as they might have been classed, for years. But The Family did something different. It invited viewers into private spaces that television had rarely entered before. It showed arguments, tensions, embarrassing moments, intimate conversations, and family conflicts with an honesty that shocked many viewers. Some people called it groundbreaking, others called it exploitation. But many critics now regard it as one of the most important British documentaries ever made. Let's take a few minutes to look back and explore what The Family was and why it caused such a stir, how the series was made, the controversies that followed, and why its influence can still be seen in everything from reality television to modern observational documentaries. To understand The Family, it's important to understand the television landscape of Britain in the early 1970s. Now, as we often say on this podcast, this was a very different era. Britain had only recently entered the age of widespread access to colour television. There were just 3 channels to watch, and families often gathered around a single television set in the evening and watched the same programmes together, usually after a heated argument as to which programme they should watch. Television carried a certain kind of authority. The BBC, in particular, was viewed as an institution of national importance. It informed, educated and entertained, as laid down by its royal charter, but it also maintained a degree of formality. As already mentioned, documentaries certainly existed and some were really good, but most documentaries still just felt like stage documentaries. There would often be a narrator, there would be experts, there'd be interviews conducted directly to camera. Viewers were generally aware they were watching a programme about something. What was less common was the feeling that the viewers were simply observing real life unfold in front of them. Now, at the same time, new developments in camera technology were making it easier for filmmakers to spend extended periods with their subjects. We were getting smaller cameras, more portable sound equipment, and there was a growing interest in what later became known as observational documentary. Instead of explaining reality, filmmakers increasingly wanted to observe it. And that is what led to The Family. The series was directed by Paul Watson and produced by Frank Rodham, and their idea was deceptively simple. Find an ordinary British family and spend enough time with them that the cameras eventually became part of the furniture. The family selected were the Wilkins family from Reading, and at the centre of the household were Mr. and Mrs. Wilkins and their children, who represented a pretty recognisable slice of working-class Britain. The filmmakers spent months filming them, so this wasn't a quick interview-based production. The crew embedded themselves in the family's daily life. Meals, conversations, arguments, celebrations, boring times. Everything was potentially part of a story. The idea was to capture reality as it happened, rather than constructing events through interviews or narration. When the series finally aired, viewers encountered something they had rarely seen before. There was no smarmy narrator guiding them, and no presenter explaining what to think. Instead, audiences were left to watch and interpret events for themselves. Today, that sounds quite normal, but in 1974 it was startlingly intimate. Don't forget, we were still a country where the stiff upper lip was quite a thing, and people were more reserved in many ways than they are today. One reason The Family became such a phenomenon was the nature of the family members. The Wilkins family were not celebrities. They weren't politicians. They weren't experts on anything. They were so-called ordinary people. But television has always had a remarkable ability to transform ordinary people into public figures. Viewers quickly became invested in the family members and their relationships. And perhaps the most famous member of the family was not a family member at all, but the lodger, Tom Burns. Tom was a young, charismatic, outspoken and frequently entertaining young man, and his love life became a major talking point amongst the viewers. In many ways, Tom became one of Britain's first reality television stars, decades before anyone used that phrase. People talked about him at work. They talked about him at the pub. His behaviour was discussed and debated in newspaper columns. This was very unusual territory in 1970s Britain. Now today we're accustomed to ordinary people becoming famous through television. In 1974 the phenomenon was still relatively new. Audiences weren't simply watching a documentary, they were becoming emotionally invested in the lives of people they had never met. And that emotional investment would contribute to both the success of and also some of the controversy which surrounded the series. One of the most fascinating things about revisiting The Family today is that some modern viewers struggle to understand why it caused such outrage for viewers of the time, given that television today routinely shows far more dramatic material. So what made The Family so shocking to its audience in 1974? I think part of the answer lies in changing social attitudes. British society in the 1970s was generally more private than it is today. Family matters were, well, considered exactly that, family matters. Many people believed certain conversations should remain behind closed doors. The Family opened up those doors and viewers witnessed disagreements between husband and wife, tensions between parents and children, conversations about relationships, and moments of real anger and disagreement. The sheer intimacy of it felt rather uncomfortable for many of the audience. There was also concern around class. Some critics of the show argue that the programme encouraged middle-class viewers to observe a working-class family almost as a form of entertainment, like looking at the animals in the zoo. Others felt the series presented the family with dignity and humanity. These debates became increasingly intense, and questions emerged about consent. Did the Wilkins family realise this was going to happen? Was the BBC documenting reality or simply exploiting it? Now, we hear similar debates today about Love Island and Married at First Sight, but the level of what we see in today's reality shows was unimaginable in the 1970s. One of the most interesting debates surrounding the family concerns a question that's never really gone away. What happens when you put a TV camera in a room? Does reality stay the same, or does it become something else? The filmmakers hoped that over time the family would become accustomed to the cameras being in place and just behave naturally. But some critics argued that the very presence of television equipment inevitably altered the family's behaviour. People have a tendency to perform, and they become much more self-conscious, so potentially they present different versions of themselves when they're on the screen. When we watch people on screen, are we seeing who they really are, or are we seeing who they become when they're being watched? The Family was one of the first mainstream UK TV shows to force viewers to think seriously about that question. And perhaps the most interesting conclusion is that, well, there may not be a simple answer. As the series gained attention, media coverage intensified. Newspapers discussed it extensively and critics weighed in. Viewers wrote letters to the family, not to the BBC producers, but to the family themselves. The Wilkins family suddenly found themselves in the spotlight. Imagine what that must have felt like. One day you're living an ordinary life in Reading, minding your own business, and the next, millions of people have opinions about you, your family, your relationships, your approach to parenting, your personality, even what you look like. Today we live in an age of social media where public scrutiny has become more commonplace, but back then this kind of exposure was much, much rarer. The Wilkins family experienced a level of public attention that few ordinary people had encountered before, and while some family members embraced the attention, others found aspects of it difficult to bear. The issues faced by the Wilkins family are now familiar to participants in reality television programmes around the world. But have we learned anything in the way we approach what's now become known as reality TV? Was The Family the first reality television programme? Well, not really is my answer, as we've already had a long history of documentaries, such as the Michael Apted show 7’, which followed a group of 7-year-old children as they grew up, with a new instalment every 7 years. However, many television historians do regard The Family as an important ancestor of modern reality TV, not because it was similar to contemporary reality programmes, but because it demonstrated that audiences could become fascinated by the everyday lives and existence of so-called ordinary people. And it showed that personal relationships could drive viewer engagement and show the extraordinary drama hidden within ordinary existence. These features would eventually shape decades of television shows. Regular listeners know that I try to cover many subjects from my own memories, but on this occasion I have taken a look at some of the original series to see whether it stands the test of time. In many ways it looks prehistoric and reminds me that my childhood was a very, very long time ago. It does look dated when you see the clothes, the hairstyles, the interiors and the rhythms of family life, like regular meal times, which don't seem to be as common as they were, and men going down to the pub, leaving the women at home. Britain in 1974 can seem like a different world, but many aspects do feel surprisingly contemporary. Family tensions are something we can all relate to, as are disagreements between parents and children. Relationship problems are timeless, and the emotions and personalities within the family unit are powerful and don't seem staged, and perhaps that's one reason the series endures. Beneath all the historical significance lies something a bit simpler. It's a story that's all about people, and stories about people tend to age well. Modern viewers may not be shocked in the same way audiences were in 1974, but they can still appreciate the authenticity and pioneering nature of what the filmmakers achieved. So what is the legacy of The Family? It was controversial, it was innovative, it was uncomfortable, and it was enormously influential. The series challenged assumptions about privacy and changed the rules about how you film a documentary. A family of ordinary people became public figures, so much so that the wedding of Marion to the lodger Tony, who we mentioned earlier, featured in the final episode, and it was mobbed by fans and photographers due to the family's newfound fame.
Tom Burns, who perfected 1,001 ways of saying no to marriage, has finally said yes, Saturday at 3:30, a time more significant than Marion may have realised.
I can still have time to go into the pub and have a quick couple of stiff ones before I go to the church.
What are you doing? Go to an execution or something?
You can't try and tell me that there isn't half the blokes who go to get married don't have a quick little stiff one to...
Well, I know I should
Gary
have a
would have
couple.
done if you hadn't have took him.
That is all a bit odd. But it did anticipate many of the debates that continue to surround reality television today about consent, about representation and authenticity. What impact does it have when cameras enter private lives and broadcast them to a huge audience? More than 50 years later, we're still arguing about those issues. Which suggests that The Family wasn't merely a television programme. It was actually a glimpse into the future of television itself. Do you remember The Family? And what did you think about it? Share your memories with us by getting in touch in the ways I mentioned earlier. And you can also email Oliver at my70stvchildhood.com. We will be back next week with our next edition of our 70s related TV trivia quiz, and in a fortnight with our next regular episode. Until then, take care, enjoy the British summer, and join us again soon for more from My 70s TV Childhood.